This is Joseph Carlson, and this is episode 35 of the Grief of Politics, and I am joined once again by Avin Carroll. Avin, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you today?
Good. It's going to be a nice light day where we're not going to discuss anything, controversial or, anyway. No, we're kidding. We are going to talk about, we have different topics and a list of topics, and obviously with what happened in Israel on October the 7th is a big deal, the attack by Hamas. And so we want to talk about that because it's obviously still an ongoing humanitarian crisis really on both sides. And we'll get into all that here. And again, we're just two people that are thousands of miles away reading about all this stuff. And that's kind of where I wanted to start, Avin. I did send you, most of the stuff I sent you was like video essays or interviews with historians and stuff. I tried to be balanced. I sent you something by Ben Shapiro. He's obviously Orthodox Jewish, wears a yarmulke on every show, has been to Israel. It makes sense. I wanted to get his perspective. But what I wanted to start with, since we're going to talk about all this, and again, these are our opinions. We're thousands of miles away. We're not historians. I want to start and ask you, what did you learn? Like, it always seems like we're having these conversations about Israel and Palestine every whatever. If you're plugged in or whatever, you may have it every few years. But it seems like now with this new, terrorist event that happened on October 7th, it seems like that now it's even pushing more to the forefront. Historians, people like that. It seems like, I was plugged in before, but it seems like my YouTube feed and my news feeds, more stuff is hitting about the Middle East. And I'm reading more articles and linking things and going down rabbit holes. So what do you think you learned this time, going over all this and all that kind of stuff?
So first off, before we go too far, a couple things I wanted to say. One, we're recording this today on Veterans Day 2023. So I wanted to just say for all of the American veterans that we have that watch this, family members of, I just want to, provide recognition to the service of those servicemen and putting their lives at risk, many of whom have fought in this region and have their own viewpoints and opinions about what's going on over there. But we do recognize, like, for all of our soldiers, the sacrifice that you've made, and at least I myself, and I'm pretty sure Joe as well, would like to just thank you for stepping up to make that sacrifice and commit that time of your life, if not even current time, to service. The second thing, kind of related to the question, and just sort of set a tone for at least me on this, and I'm sure Joe, you and I have talked about this a lot. You probably agree, right? As you said in the beginning, this is very difficult. Both sides have lost lives. To make it abundantly clear, no matter what is said in the podcast here today, I think both of us agree that we condemn completely the actions of Hamas and what they did. I think you and I are pretty universally in agreement that there is no justification for the level of violence and just hatred acted out on the people of Israel by Hamas when they made the attack on October 7th and what was done.
It's a terrorist attack. That's what it is, plain and simple. It's not. It's like we view a terrorist attack here. 9/11, that was a terrorist attack. I mean, obviously, this terrorist attack is being compared to that because of the loss of Jewish life, and it should be. It is a terrorist attack, and it, even.
And the reason I bring it up, though, is because there is a lot of people in the United States right now that are unwilling to condemn it and aren't calling it a terrorist attack. So I wanted to set the tone that you and I are both in agreement on that, despite the fact that others may not be.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about probably when we talk about Ben Shapiro later, but I do want to address some of that. I'm not condoning those people who are like, they got a point. I'm just saying, I think we'll get into it. Because this is probably going to be a longer episode because there is a lot to talk about.
But I did want to set the tone in the beginning that both you and I are in agreement that this was a terrorist attack, completely condemnable, and the actions of Hamas are utterly inexcusable. Despite what you might say on anything else, despite what we may view on anything else, I just wanted to set that right from the very beginning, because you and I are both also very reasonable people and are willing to look at all of the arguments openly. You and I are not going to just blanket dismiss anything, but I wanted to make it clear that no matter what we say as we go through this, we do unequivocally denounce the actions of Hamas on October 7th.
Yeah, I mean it's one of those things where when the immediacy when I was seeing that, you immediately think of 9/11 because people were making comparisons, and
Correct.
being an American, obviously you're just like, I can't believe that, and again we'll get into it with the longer episode, but the comparisons don't stop there. So, yeah, So what do you think? Like I said, now that we've talked about it, what do you think you learned this time, having to read over all this stuff and.
So coming back to that question, sorry, I went off on a tangent.
No, it's
coming
totally
back
fine.
to the question.
That's what today's. That's usually what happens, Avin. Let's be honest. That's what the podcast is.
I cannot remember his name now. Was it? I don't know how to pronounce it. Pappy?
Elon
Pape?
Poppy. Yeah.
Poppy?
Yeah.
So the interview with Elon Poppy was really interesting to me. So for the content that Joe sent out, one of them was a video from Elon Poppy. I don't remember the name of the podcast. I'll have it here in a second. It's Understanding the Myths and Realities of Israel with Elon Poppy. I don't know the name of the podcast. It's not here.
It's the Majority Report. He was on the Majority Report with Sam Cedar. Sam Cedar does like a daily YouTube show. I like Sam Cedar because he's worked, I believe he's worked in politics, and he was on Air America. So he has a little bit workings of the inside. He's also an actor. People make fun of him because he was not a successful actor, or he made some money. He makes jokes about it. Like I've definitely done better as a whatever. And he's Jewish. He went to,
correct.
He went to, what he said, he had a Jewish education in the 70s, and that was part of the interview where he talked about, his professors had tattoos on their arms from the camps that had survived. And he said, then when you get older, you start reevaluating. Not, obviously, he's not reevaluating the Holocaust, but he says, you're seeing one side of something. And then when you start talking to more people, you get another perspective of, the other side.
Right, and we all do as we grow up, right? Like,
right.
I grew up in a Democratic family, Democrat politically.
Man, what happened?
My family didn't vote for stuff democratically, so I want to make sure I'm clear on that. I grew up in a family that was a family of Democrats and liberals, and I definitely had political leanings that way for most of my younger years. As I got older, I kind of became disillusioned with the Democratic Party. So then I moved more conservative and Republican. Then as I got older again and started looking at it, I kind of became disillusioned with the Republicans too. Mm-hmm. And now I'm independent and, as we've discussed, kind of libertarian leaning.
And we might talk about that in a month or so. We've been talking about that offline of like the whole.
What does it mean to be libertarian? Yeah, but not related to this particular discussion. So, right, like it's expected as we grow older, as we experience things, as we see things, as the world evolves around us, right? Like we evolve as well. And so, in this interview with Elon Poppy, Sam Cedar actually even kind of calls out, like, he was in Israel for his confirmation, and I'm not sure what that means because I'm not Jewish. Assuming it's related.
Some people are talking about, some Jewish people are talking about that there are these birthright trips. So there's these, Jewish religious organizations that do these birthright trips where they pay for people to go to Israel, Jewish people to go to Israel, so they can see the Holy Land. And I've seen many people online talk about, hey, I was part of this trip. It was very affecting. But then, again, when we start talking about Palestinians in Gaza, they said they would look over and see and be like, this is a completely different situation than what I was told. Or like you look over and see a wall and then your professor's like, well, here's history. And you're like, well, why is that wall over there? And they would like, but anyway, that sets the tone where I think he went on one of those birthright trips or something. Or like you said, was confirmed.
He talks about going to his confirmation, and he talks about 1982 is when he did it. And they were like, while they were out somewhere, they were watching helicopters flying along the waterway headed to Beirut.
Oh yeah.
And I only remember that something happened in Beirut. I do not remember the specifics because in 1982 I was 1 year old. Yeah. So I don't.
Too, yeah. So.
Right, and so like I don't remember the significance of it the same way that he does. But he talked about how that was transformative for him, and he told his rabbi he couldn't do this anymore, and what that means to him. He didn't dive into the details, or if he does, I didn't watch the entire video. It was an hour plus long. Mm-hmm. But the interview with Elon, Poppy was interesting to me because he brought up a lot of sort of historical facts about how things were done to establish Israel after World War II and how people were moved there. And you and I talked offline about some other things related to that, but his kind of perspective was in the 1980s and early 90s, a bunch of Israeli documents were declassified that talked about like, yeah, we knew we were displacing these Palestinians, but it was kind of the lesser of two evils because we kind of felt like we needed to prevent another one of these Holocausts and we needed to sort of make things right for the Israelis. And so the Western powers
the
sort
Jewish
of just,
immigrants coming in to make Israel or whatever.
yeah. So they sort of forced people out with their influence in military
And the Palestinians, I looked this up as well.
power of the time.
I kept hearing a phrase called the Nakba or the Nakba, which is basically the catastrophe in Arabic, and it basically is the when they were displaced. They call it the Nakba. Like, remember the Nakba? Like, we were displaced. Remember that type thing? So I looked that up on the UN, and they pretty much confirmed that it's when they were 1947 or 48 when they were displaced. Yeah. And that's not
48.
Yeah, that's not to do a judgment because I'm sure, yes, obviously the Jewish settlers displaced these people. Who fired first? I don't know. I'm not going to say. But just like I told you offline, what I considered it was, in a way, Elon Poppy brought up that point of it being a colonial settler state, meaning that, there was people that came in from another region or whatever, and there was already, indigenous people there to that region. Correct. And the analog we have in the United States is the Native Americans, right? Like, they were here, we showed up and said, we're going to take all this, and we fought, and we did, you can call it a genocide, but I mean, ethnic cleansing gets thrown around a lot. And obviously there's literature we have in America to talk about that with Native Americans, that they were dirty or whatever, or savages, and we needed to make them more Western. But I don't know if, our intention was just to get the land. I think if we would have killed all the Native Americans, some people, probably majority of the population back then, probably would have been okay with it. You know what I mean? So that gets thrown around
most
a lot.
Likely at that time, right? Like, they were heathens, they were savages, right? Like, the language that was used at that time. And again, you and I talked about this offline, right? Like, it's one of those things where the genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back. Right. So well, Sam, specifically speaking about Israel.
Yeah, Sam brings that up when he talked to Elon Poppy about, like, we have the luxury to say that was hundreds of years ago, but like with this happening in Israel and Palestine, it continues to happen. And they bring up the West Bank, which is another problem of Jewish settlements, where they will just move in to a Palestinian neighborhood and say all these houses are ours, and they will roll in with the military, and say these are.
And that's literally something that in the founding of the United States, that is a portion of why the colonies rebelled, because the king did that. Like, he would roll in with the military and just take people's homes, and we rebelled against England because of that.
Well, then, but then
that's a part of it, right? There was a lot more,
but then also we had treaties with Native Americans, but then after a while they didn't really mean a lot, and we just took stuff anyway, right? It's like, well, we don't really need to live up to these treaties. It's like the same thing of like, hey, no more settlements in the whatever, and you're like, okay, like the UN obviously doesn't like settlements. They've written about it. Other international organizations don't like the settlements in West Bank, but Israel just does it, right? So it's like, oh, well, it's whatever, and so that's kind of what it is. So yeah,
and so it's one of those things where it's like, how do you stop this? So from Elon Poppy's perspective, right, it was enlightening to hear kind of about those early perspectives. Like, they knew that this was not necessarily right. It wasn't like in a moralistic way from a Western perspective. We would not define what they were doing right. We knew it wasn't right by our measures at the time, but the consensus thought was it's still the lesser of two evils to displace these people, move them out of their land, and move the Israeli people there. Like, they felt like, hey, this is the right and just thing for us to do. And now, and not just now, it's been going on basically since the founding of the state of Israel, that now we're dealing with the ramifications of it, and have been for quite a while, and it's just growing and growing and growing. And you and I have discussed offline too, and I didn't watch the whole video, so I don't know if Poppy or Cedar addresses it, but like they hate each other. They animalize each other. They dehumanize each other by comparing them to animals. Um, in the in the podcast section with Ben Shapiro, like he made a comment about they need to come up and fight like men instead of like rats.
Yeah. Well, that was now that we bring up Ben Shapiro, I'm secretly fascinated with him. What I found, I was as he was saying things, I was just pulling up Google and like searching. So there is people, and we talked about this in the beginning, and I want to talk about this. There is people, college students. I was a dumb 18-year-old at one time that are literally pro Hamas, right? They're flying Hamas flags. I've seen the photos. I've heard of the rallies. But most of the newer protests I've seen are people in London, in D.C., I think in New York, with Palestinians' flags saying ceasefire now, we stand with the Palestinian people. And when I was watching Ben Shapiro, a lot of his YouTube shorts and stuff were like, look at these pro-Hamas people. And he was just showing videos of the ceasefire now rallies with people just holding Palestinian flags. Now, the Hamas flag and the Palestinian flag look different. So you would be able to spot in a crowd. From what I've seen, the Hamas flag is green, like green banner on top, green banner on the bottom, and white in the middle with like some Arabic in the center, I believe. And the Palestinian flag is green, red, and black triangle. So they look distinct. My thing is, I understand from his perspective, being Jewish and he has admitted he's had relatives that obviously didn't survive the Holocaust or survived the Holocaust. So, that sense of like we have a home and we are wronged and we need to protect our home. To an extent, I understand that, but like this will just keep. I mean, and we talk about this all the time. It'll just keep perpetuating. If you say, "Look at all these people that are calling for a ceasefire," they stand with Hamas, and you're like, "That's not." Hey. And there's thousands of people in those crowds. Somebody could be flying a Hamas flag, and I didn't see it in the footage or the photos. Or some people could be like, "Well, fly the Palestinian flag. I really stand with Hamas, but we don't want to get called out or whatever." But I would say most people are seeing what's happening in Gaza and just like, "Hey, man, just stop bombing them. That's all we want," And
I think, one, Ben Shapiro in that video directly addresses that, but two, I think the bigger thing that he's trying to highlight is that these same people aren't condemning Hamas. They're supporting Palestine, but not condemning Hamas. And that was a thing that he repeatedly brought up, these different organizations and politicians that are unwilling to take that extra step of condemnation of the actions of Hamas.
Right.
And I think that matters.
Yeah, that does matter. I will say that
There needs to be that distinction, right? Like as you just brought up, like there's different flags. There's the Palestinian nation.
Yeah.
And there's the Hamas nation, which, Hamas isn't even a nation. They're the governing body. Yeah. They are the government of Palestine. Now, it also needs to be distincted, right? As a Western audience, as Western people, we live in democratic countries. The government of Hamas over Palestine is not a democratically elected government. They came in, might makes right. They take over. However, in the was it a Reason piece that you sent me?
Yeah,
article.
They're libertarian, Avin. That's why I sent you the article. And
that author highlighted that in two separate polls over the last 2 years, the people of Palestine have been in support of, by a thin margin, Hamas governing the country.
Right. Well, I want to point out two things. Again, being from the U.S. and experiencing 9/11,
for the people,
we do separate the governments and then the actions of people.
We do,
and
for good reason.
Right, for very good reason. And so I think a lot of talk about like Hamas kind of like coming to prominence. What I've read and stuff is that desperate people at the time were desperate, and they haven't had any new elections, is from what I've heard. So like now Hamas is in power, and it's like, well, we can't really get rid of them, type thing, So I mean, to me, it's one of those things where. The one I sent you a couple weeks ago, he used to work, I think, for the Department of Defense, and he went over. I'll get his name here soon, but he talked about the situation, and the most depressing thing he said in the interview I heard was he was interviewed by Breaking Points. You and I both really like Breaking Points. He was interviewed. It was like a 30-minute interview, and he basically said the most depressing thing was that the more and more time he spent going over there and talking to Israelis with their military and the IDF, the less and less they talked about a peaceful solution. So there was less of a window of people being open to the peace process. So that, to me, that was very depressing to hear somebody who's had relations and went over there and is like, yeah, even the Israelis are like, now that, make Gaza a parking lot or whatever as time went on.
It's the reality of like the United States though too, right? Like you and I, part of the reason that we started doing this podcast to begin with, one of the reasons that you wanted us to do this, and I 100% agree, is even here we're becoming more and more divided and less willing to hear one another. We're becoming less civil and more divided because of it, because we're less willing to listen to what the other side has to say, and far more likely to just, well, it's something the other side likes, and so I have to hate it.
Yeah,
and it's an extreme version of what's going on in Israel and Palestine, right? Like the Israeli people have been attacked, rockets, artillery, and a government that's very much against it, and they're raised in a society and a culture from childhood looking at Hamas and the Palestinian people as a whole as the enemy, and they're raised to hate this inhuman enemy. And then vice versa, it's the same thing, right? The Palestinians, since this started, and so generations of them have been raised to hate Jews. And I mean, it's part of Hamas's platform.
Yeah, their charter started. Everybody brings Jews. That up. And I think what happened was they actually have changed their charter, which I'm not saying that those intentions aren't still there, but I think even they and their leadership realized, hey, I don't think we're going to get anywhere if we talk about eradicating a group of people. So I think they've said maybe we should tone it down. And by the way, the guy's name was Daryl Cooper. It's called the Martyr Made podcast. He was on Breaking Points. He does he did like a whole series. I think he called it like New Jerusalem. There's several parts, and it was very informative. And he he basically said, like I said, the depressing part was he said, the more people I talk to over in Israel, there's less and less of a chance for peace, which is just incredibly depressing, for someone to say that. So,
and it's unfortunate, right? Like, but that hatred is growing, and this is only going to compound that.
Yeah.
So, like in the podcast with Ben Shapiro brings up like, well, Hamas wants the ceasefire, and it's good for Hamas to have the ceasefire because they need to be able to regroup and get things in the right place. And all these people that are calling for a ceasefire are all pro-Hamas because they call for it.
If you have a ceasefire, they will just reload, basically. They will just prepare and reload.
And on the flip side of that, right, like from a militaristic strategy standpoint, I don't disagree, right? I mean, Hamas is already willing to use human shields. They've proven it over and over again. They do not care. And again, Ben Shapiro brings that up too, right? Like they will literally strap up women and children in front of them to use as human shields to prevent us from killing them. But on the flip side of it, like, I do agree with ceasefire, right? Like innocent civilians, and different people are going to ascribe what they declare as innocent or not innocent. But the reality of it is the Palestinian people did not vote in the government of Hamas.
Mm-hmm.
They just have to live with it.
Yeah, they have to. Well, that's the thing is like the one criticism. Well, I mean, I have several criticisms of Ben Shapiro, but in this situation, the one criticism I will always bring up is like, he says, well, Hamas uses people as human shields, so if they don't, it's their fault basically, which I think is a big ask to basically say, well, if they don't value human life, then I don't have to. Like to me, that's a great way to absolve yourself of thinking about, oh, I'm killing a kid. Or
there's counterpoints to that too, though, Joe. I mean, honestly, if there were a terrorist hiding behind those people that had their trigger on a bomb that was going to kill another 1,000 of your people, would you kill the innocents in front of them to stop the terrorists from killing 1,000 of your friends and family?
But that's not how hostage situations work. You try to diffuse the situation so as many people make it out alive. When you carpet bomb,
there is no negotiating with this. This isn't a hostage situation.
But what I'm saying is,
you know that those are different. Those are obscure.
But
and I guess my point, that's what you're going for. My point is different, but that's.
But what I'm saying is, with carpet bombing an area, like then
they're not carpet bombing. These are strategic pinpoint attacks. They're just doing it where there are civilians.
Well, my point.
Like the interview that Ben Shapiro did shared. He shared a clip of an interview with an Israeli cabinet member, or was he like a military
Yeah.
leader in Israel?
Right.
I don't remember exactly, but he shared this interview clip with CNN where they were interviewing this guy from Israel, and they were like, "Well, how many civilians died when you attacked this area?" And he was like, "Look, there was a Hamas commander. We knew he was there. We needed to kill him."
Well, that
And he
is
didn't answer the question.
that was a refugee camp. They couldn't confirm in that interview if they actually got the commander. And after that interview, they hit the refugee camp 2 more times, killing more
Right.
people.
So, but the point I'm getting at has nothing to do with those facts. The point I'm getting at is using that just as an example, right? In Israel's eyes, leaving these commanders alive means that in the future they will make future attacks and they will kill more Israelis. And so, in Israel's eyes, they're saying if we kill him now, there will be a cost of human life, but we will prevent that man from planning more attacks and killing more Israelis. And Israel doesn't fight on the terms that we do as Westerners, right? We fight with a different set of morals. The United States doesn't do this. We do everything. We do everything we can to prevent civilian deaths, to the point of telling American soldiers in combat zones, don't fire back. You might hurt civilians. Israel doesn't do that. Israel says, the man who killed our people is there. I don't care if I'm going to kill 50 civilians to kill him. I don't want him killing more of my civilians.
Well, then I think
I also think part of this too, though, is that dehumanization, right? It's easier to do that when
Right.
you don't see the people in the area as human. And I'm not saying they don't, right? He even brings up like we're trying not to kill civilians, but they're hiding among civilians.
well,
So that's his justification, right? And we have to remember, right? We're measuring this with our Western moral structure. Israel doesn't think the way we do. They don't strategize the way we do.
well, that's the thing though. Again, I hate to pick on Ben Shapiro again. He every time
It's easy.
every time they bring up like a national organization or international, like the UN or Red Cross, like Doctors Without Borders, all these organizations, I believe there's 18 that have said that what's going on is an apartheid state. It's bordering on ethnic cleansing or whatever, and he will just laugh away.
Elon Poppy said just as much. He called it ethnic cleansing flat out.
Yeah. And so my thing is, it's like, I just find it hard. Like, I think that's what it is like, again, bringing up, we're Americans. We didn't serve in the military, but we obviously lived through 9/11, the 20 years. And now, Benjamin Netanyahu's talking about an occupation of Gaza. And it's like, this didn't go well for us, and it's, what are you doing?
And it doesn't.
Yeah.
Shapiro and the same thing, like, right, like, keep going back to that one. He brought up an example of a media personality, don't remember the guy's name, who basically was like, hey, by doing these things, we're just breeding more terrorists. Because they're going to have sympathy, they're going to have loss, they're going to have grief, and they're going to want revenge. And so, like, we're just breeding the next generation of terrorists by continuing to do this without compassion, without mercy.
Yeah, because
that's not the words of the other guy, but that was the argument that was made.
Well,
and I don't disagree with that.
Yeah, I mean,
right? Like, you can't just look short term. Israel, I don't remember exactly how I worded it with you, but it's something along the lines, right, of like, Israel got punched in the face and given a bloody nose. And I don't want to call the murder of their people something as insignificant as that. But from an analogy standpoint, they're now going back and beating up the friends of the guy who was like, punch him in the nose.
Right. And exactly, again, the correlation or the us comparing it to 9/11, it's very similar where I was a person in college going, we're bombing Kabul, man. Let's go to Iraq. Let's get those guys. I went on tirades in college against people that are like, should we be doing this? And I was like, you're not American, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But I think,
and that's what you do in these scenarios.
And people like Breaking Points, like Sagar and Breaking Points, and some other people have been like, one, what is your plan? And two, you have to be careful because, yes, we have been in your position. We suffered a terrorist attack on 9/11. What, 3,000 civilians died when the towers, something?
I think it was closer to 5.
Yeah, 5, a lot. And so
maybe not. I don't remember.
like I think 1,500 people died in this attack. So we understand the anger that comes with that and the need to strike back at, like you said, the people that punch you in the nose. But like, you really need to think about this long term and like, do we want to do this?
9/11 was 2996.
Okay.
3,000.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, 1,500 people in a far more, less dramatic, but more brutal attack, right? 9/11 was somewhat impersonal. They flew planes into buildings.
Right.
People died and suffered.
Yeah.
In this, like, Hamas came across in face-to-face combat.
A music festival and started rounding people up, and I've seen the video, hang gliding, with hang gliders coming in. I mean, that's because and using bulldozers and all that, so it, yeah, I'm just saying, I think that, especially being American, looking at it going, this is, you guys really need, and I think, I understand, now with President Biden, Arab support has plummeted because we are paying for this. Our aid goes over there, and we basically said, I mean, several times, Blinken and a couple other, I think Jack Kirby, our defense, whatever, they were basically like, there's no red line. And then as it went on, a reporter asked him point blank, is there a new red line now that we've gotten new figures out of casualties out of Gaza? Have you changed your stance? And he said, absolutely not. So I could see an Arab community looking at that going, oh, so there's no...
Kill as many Palestinians as you want, as many Arabs as you want.
Yeah, there's no red line, so great. So we're just going to continue to... This is going to continue to happen,
And because of that, right, like, you continue to breed more animosity, more hatred, you erode trust, and it's corrosive, right? There's the short-term reward. That guy punched us in the face. I punched him, his brother, his mom, and his sister in the face to prove a point.
Right.
And that's kind of what Israel's doing. Now, that's not strategically what they're talking about, right? Like, their whole plan is to go in and gut Hamas so that Hamas no longer has any power. But then, they talk about, we're going to occupy. They don't want to give any room for Hamas to regrow. But the reality of it is it's going to continue to, right? Like, if they occupy Gaza, what's going to happen is all those who lost family members are just going to grow in resentment and grow in anger, and the attacks will become more small and more localized.
Yeah, and
suicide bombings, just bombings in general, right? That kind of stuff is going to run rampant, and they're going to do things like cross the border and bomb civilian places in Israel over time. They're not going to solve the long-term war with terrorism as we did, right?
Yeah, I mean,
by going in and breeding more terrorists.
Yeah, I mean, I think I talked to you this online. That same person, Daryl Cooper, who had the Martyr Made podcast, he talked to Jocko Williams. I always forget Jocko's last name, but he was Wilnick. He was a SEAL. And he's got he's yoked out of his mind. I wish I had half of his physique, but he gets up at like
4:30. I mean, you can have it, Joe. Just get to work.
God, 3 in the morning. But he talked about that. He was part of an invasion, I think, in Kabul or somewhere. And anyway, he did something where he said, when you're talking about bombing something, like he said, what we did, and he goes, it was very bad. He said, you have to literally hearts and minds. And you have to go from block to block. You have to start getting to know people. You have to build relationships. And he goes, I had to look at I'm paraphrasing on this, but he basically said they played the clip on Breaking Points because they wanted to illuminate, like, hey, here's an actual veteran who served. It's like, this is not how you do it. We tried this. It didn't work. And his whole
Which is interesting coming from Sagar, because Sagar is a pretty right-leaning, like, he is the conservative voice of Breaking Points.
Well, his thing is, like, he said the other day, like, America first, right? Because a lot of people are saying, like, well, what is it in our interest? Because, now things are heating up, obviously, in the Middle East. All these Arab countries are like, hey, stop. What's going on? Stop bombing the Gazans. And, like, Iran is proxies, or that'd be a whole new episode. But, Jocko's thing was, like, it sucks. You have to look at the men under you and say, some of you are not going to make it. I might not make it, but, like, this is worth it. So we have to go.
That's an interesting point too, because that was one of the other things that Shapiro had brought up was, what, do you want Israeli soldiers to have to go into the city and have to die?
Right.
Which is exactly what Jocko was kind of
Yeah, he's like, yeah.
advocating.
He's like,
Go in and go door to door.
and they may die, but the relationships you build, he's like, he said it's a terrible thing to say, but you have to go in and be friends with them. And he goes, sincerely be friends. Like, we all want this to be better. What do we have to do? And from a humanitarian standpoint, one of the things that I didn't realize, one of the things that I learned about researching all this is Israel has the ability to turn off water and like basic needs of people in Palestine. I mean, I knew about the situation with them being in an area. The Gaza Strip is basically an open air prison. All this stuff, I've heard of that, but I didn't hear about like fuel or water or food, and how that's controlled in. Israel only controls so much of that, and they can turn it off. And from a humanitarian thing, it's like, well, that's also a reason why, like Mark Lamont Hill, I think I'm saying his name wrong, but he's talked about that, where he's like, he has been a human rights activist for a long time. He was at CNN. He got fired. He was doing a long interview because somebody brought him in and said, I don't understand about all this. Please tell me about what's going on in the Middle East. And he studied it for a long time. And he said, well, the thing is, it's like, when you can't even, like, you don't even have access to like drinking water or fuel or whatever, then what does that do to like your quality of life and how you view the other side? And that's another thing, again, to complain about Ben Shapiro is he said, well, Hamas, you want us to just give them water and gas? Well, tell Hamas, Hamas is taking it all. And I'm like,
I didn't watch the whole video, but I did watch the part about gasoline. And it's like, yeah, if we give them gas, Hamas is just going to use it to power their caves and their tunnels so that they can stay there and protect and hide themselves. Which he's not wrong.
No,
he isn't wrong.
He isn't wrong, but my thing is like, but like they're stealing all of it. Like that's my thing is like they're probably stealing some of it, but like there is hospitals, they are running on generators, like all this stuff. If you don't, if you don't
take 90% of it, right, you're still empowering the terrorist organization.
Yeah, but I mean, without any like
get the people out,
right? But without any hard numbers, my point is like that is an unquantifiable thing. That like Hamas is stealing the fuel. How much? Well, we don't know. Well, does that mean these other?
Do you care how much? I mean, obviously you do because you're bringing it up. Because my point is like, you don't give weapons to your enemies to fight back with.
No, you don't. But the thing is, my thing is like when you talked earlier about them breeding more or whatever, it's like, okay, well, yeah, like Hamas is stealing. Like you have to make everything unappealing, right? So you have to give people some kind of like like my thing is like it's amazing to me. I know Ben brought this also up in his video that like just because you're powerful doesn't mean you're an oppressor, and just because you're powerless doesn't mean that your cause your cause is righteous or you're oppressed. And I would say that's true. But like being able to go over and just shut the water off on effectively 2 million people, like that says a lot for people's basic.
Ben brought up Ben Shapiro brought up the idea, like, or kind of highlighted the idea that Israel keeps saying, like, well, we warned them to get out of there. We told them 2 weeks ago to leave. But, I would bring up the counterpoint.
Where?
You closed all the borders, and no one's letting them in. The border with Egypt isn't letting them in. So where are the civilians supposed to go?
Yeah. And
especially when you are bombing refugee camps because Hamas is hiding among the people. It's a quasi-military. It's an ununiformed military.
Right.
It's impossible to know who is and isn't with Hamas unless you actually legitimately have intelligence with pictures, which Israeli intelligence is pretty dang good at that. But not everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and speaking of that, a lot of people have talked about how Israel didn't know this happened. Apparently, again, they were, punched in the nose, and they have very good intelligence. We give them a lot of money for that as well. And there is a question of like, yeah, why didn't you know? And there's been some theories that maybe, Hamas had been playing this for a while, and maybe they didn't think they were going to be as successful as they were. So they thought, well, the moment we get to where we're getting, the Israeli military is just going to come and crush us, basically. But there was a point brought up on Breaking Points and other places that most of the troops, Netanyahu moved to the West Bank, away from Gaza. So there wasn't as many soldiers that there would normally be in Gaza. They were all in the West Bank. which is increasing in settler violence. I think they said like over 100 people have died since October 7th, since this began in the West Bank, which is settlers. So it's the military rolling in and telling people you need to leave your home. There's been a lot of firsthand accounts of, they said that, they don't, at first, the military doesn't show up, it's settlers. They'll throw rocks at people, and then the military will show up, the Israeli military, the IDF. And, exodus people, make them, again, like make them push them out of their home so Jewish settlers or Israeli settlers can move in.
Yeah.
And so,
Which, again, it's fomenting, right? It builds the resentment. It builds the anger. And people do really dumb things when we're emotional.
yeah.
And, right, like the recent article you shared, right? The author of the article highlights that like 50% of people in Gaza live in poverty.
Yeah. Many of
Or
those
51% live in poverty, right? So
the median,
you're already at the edge of emotional stress. And
yeah, they're 50% unemployment, like half the population is like children, basically. So they're growing up now and seeing all this. You know what I mean? Like, and remembering all this. So.
And they're younger, so they were living in anger and hate and frustration and wanting, like, more ways to strike out at the people that are holding them back and holding them down. And when you're raised your whole life that the people that are doing it are inhuman,
right? Yeah.
Then you strike out. And so, right, that's a reason for why it happened. That doesn't make it justifiable. I'm not saying that I agree with what Israel is doing, but I do understand because it is the way that they think, it is the way that they act. The argument they make is an old argument, right? Like, you don't negotiate with terrorists. You don't provide safe harbor for terrorists. You don't give them room because every time you do, you teach them they can do it. I actually really like Jocko's philosophy on it, right? You go in and you win hearts and minds. You go in and you make the painful sacrifices to make friends with these people, to get to know them, to show them that, like, I respect you as a human being. I don't agree with your lifestyle choices, but like,
yeah,
I want you to be able to raise your kids healthily. Because I want to raise my kids healthily.
Right. Well, just like like we said at the beginning, or maybe I said, you don't conflate the government with the group of people. Even in Israel, there was discontent with Netanyahu and his party, and there was already protests happening because he was going to redo the Supreme Court. I don't know if you heard about all that.
Lots of controversy over Netanyahu lately.
Yeah, so people were like, "Hey, he's not great." So like, you have this thing of like, Israeli people are also like, "This isn't right what we're doing," and you have the Jewish Coalition for Peace saying, ceasefire now. Like, we don't. We love Israel, but we don't stand with Netanyahu. Just like many people here in the States were like, hey, I don't want to bomb Iraq and Afghanistan. And like, I don't believe in what George W. Bush. Yes, I voted for him. And that brings me to my question, which I asked you when we first started talking about this, is like, what is a proportionate response to something like this? What is considered, I guess, acceptable, that's,
what is the value of a human life?
Yeah,
kind of interesting. Actually, they bring that up in you and I are playing Baldur's Gate 3, and that's one of the questions kind of early on a character asks you, which is kind of funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
But right, like, what is the value of a life? What is the value of a life, right? And I think most Westerners would say that you can't put a price on a life. The problem is in this, right? Like, it's a war. Like, how far does it go? Is Hamas willing to surrender? Are the leaders of Hamas willing to come up and say we shouldn't have done this and we don't want our people to suffer?
Well,
no.
There's been talks of that where they, even for them, it crossed like a line, and they said, it's been reported on other things, but I again heard it on Breaking Points, but it's been reported in other places where Hamas came forward and said, hey, if you ceasefire like for 72 hours, we will release the international hostages. So like not the Israeli, and Israel said no. So from the reports I can read. So again, you're saying like they won't negotiate with terrorists, but like it's going to be hard to, and again, the question is being brought up. Fine. So you're bombing these areas. Where are the hostages? Are they in these areas that you're bombing? So by you carrying out this offensive instead of going from door to door, which is terrible again. And military people have said that.
Yep.
It's like, what is going to go on? So like, that's my question this whole time is like, what is a proportionate response to all this? You know, what should be the proper whatever?
I don't know that there's an answer, right? Israel would tell you that the proportional response is the elimination of Hamas. Hamas, I don't know what their response would be. I'm not even going to speculate, but you know, historically, their response would be, you know, the elimination of all Jews.
What they did on October 7th, that's their response to the ongoing violence and whatever. So,
correct, but you know, Ben did bring up one really good point very early on that I do strongly agree with him on, right? Like, the responsibility of a government is to protect its people. And Hamas doesn't give two rips about its citizenry. Otherwise, Hamas would turn over the people that did the attack and say, you know what? Here's all the planners. Here's the soldiers.
Yeah, I did.
Please stop killing our people.
I did read a report early on that supposedly they got one Hamas lieutenant or something, and they found plans on him that were labeled top secret that basically laid out their plans. And a lot of people brought up the fact, like, wait a minute, they were just carrying around top secret plans with them? Like, this doesn't seem like a thing that, like, regular foot soldiers would be doing. It seems very suspect. And some of the early bombing runs, they got some audio from supposed Hamas terrorists, and they had experts from both sides of the aisle that were, like, examining the dialect and everything and said, this sounds a little bit too planted.
Yeah, and I've heard too that the supposed pictures of babies that were beheaded were staged, and
not to say there wasn't death, but I think what I read about that was the IDF went into an area, like, clean up, saw something horrific, and just started reporting on what they saw, and it became this like big thing. And later they were like, oh well, maybe it wasn't that bad. It's still bad. Civilians were killed.
I mean,
but
we work in hyperbole when we're in a heightened emotional states and we're angry at an enemy person or thing.
That old saying of you know, the first thing that's lost in war is the truth, or something like that. You know, like, it doesn't matter anymore. That or as I heard today, when someone's lying, it's actually another guy named Normal Finkelstein or Finkel. Anyway, he's like a Jewish scholar and everything. His parents survived the Holocaust. And he talked about, he's been responding directly to Ben Shapiro, like, hey, you're saying this stuff and you know you're wrong. Like, you know this isn't right. But anyway, not to pick on Ben Shapiro again, but he brought up an old Polish saying, which I'm going to use now, which translates in English is to, you're basically shitting above your asshole. Like, you're lying so much that it's not even close. Like, it's not even a white lie. You're just lying way too much right now. And I was like, that's an amazing saying, and I'm going to use that somehow on somebody.
I lost where I was going to go with that. That I'm now thinking of that saying.
It's good. It's so good.
It's not that much different from just saying that, you know, you're spewing bullshit.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
What's coming out of your mouth is just excrement, not truth, not anything else. But I mean, the reality of it is there's always propaganda stuff that goes on. There's always spinning. Like, we did it during World War II. The Germans did it during World War II. We did it during Vietnam. There's always propaganda in war. It's just the nature of what ends up happening. The point I was getting at in that, though, is right, like, Hamas has the power to end this. They could stop it tomorrow. Israel could stop it tomorrow too, but Israel isn't going to, because they're enraged. They're blinded by their rage at the moment. In my own personal opinion, I really wonder if part of the reason this was successful is if Iran and kind of indirectly Russia kind of pushed them into it. Like, yeah, we're going to back you. Yeah, go for it. Like, we're going to do this. We're going to give you this stuff. We'll feed you some intelligence. We'll help you in these ways. Because personally, I think what's happening right now in Israel benefits Iran in that it stopped the negotiations that were going on between the United States and Israel and Saudi Arabia for Saudi Arabia to actually recognize Israel as a state. Like, it was about to happen. We were basically there.
Yeah.
So that's off the table now. That's done.
Yeah.
And it helps Russia because now the United States is distracted and providing aid and support to Gaza, and Ukraine's kind of on the back burner in the eyes of a lot of media. We're not hearing about Ukraine as much anymore.
I just got a news.
Um,
I just got a news alert before we started my phone that supposedly the U.S. through back channels is trying to get Zelensky to broker some kind of peace deal with Russia, because again, listen, Ukraine was attacked and it was terrible, and they're a sovereign country. But the thing is, how long is this going to go on? How many more how many more Ukrainians and Russians are going to die? What is the end game? Like, the Ukraine just wants Russia to leave its borders. Russia obviously wants, it seems like, to embrace them back into the USSR's, well, whatever the Soviet Union's good graces is or whatever. And Ukraine's a sovereign country, and they're like, no. So what is the end game? What's going to make everybody
on that note, Zelensky this week made it very clear the only terms he'll accept for a ceasefire is Russia completely removing their troops from all of Ukrainian land, including Crimea.
Wow,
that won't happen.
Yeah, no, it won't. But also, there was a report, I think, in Time magazine that kind of went over, in Ukraine it's not going as well as we thought, or something. I need to read the piece.
Well, a Ukrainian commander recently came out and kind of, people are calling it admission, but kind of outlined what's going on and how they changed their tactics to more slow tactics because, we trained them in Western combined arms warfare and sent them out to go do combined arms warfare, but we didn't actually give them the aircraft to do combined arms warfare, so they can't win at it. So they pivoted back to, tanks and men doing infantry maneuvers in a more slow format. And so that commander basically, in his kind of write-up that came out to the public, I don't know if it was intended to or if it leaked, but basically said they're in a stalemate. And the West doesn't want to support an indefinite war because,
we've done that with our troops. And we were like,
and civilians,
anywhere else is
the
bad.
civilian population in the United States is not okay with a protracted, drawn-out, slow war of attrition. We're not going to support them indefinitely. And the reality of it is, Ukraine can't do that indefinitely. Russia can throw tens or hundreds of thousands of soldiers into the meat grinder over and over and over and over and over and over again. Ukraine is a very small country.
Well, not only
they only have so many troops that they can put forward. They're not going out to their vassal states and conscripting 200,000 soldiers and throwing them to the front lines with almost no training. Ukraine can't afford to lose troops. So the Israeli conflict is a complete distraction for the West, right? Now, conservative Republican senators and congressmen are, tying Ukrainian aid to Israeli aid, or hey, well, let's just not give any more money to Ukraine. Let's give it to Israel. Or the most recent thing, they tied Ukrainian aid to the border package, border security package, right? And so the appetite for supporting Ukraine is going down. And then when you bring something like Israel-Gaza into this, it's even easier for that to get even further from mind and less important of a strategy. When in the beginning we said we would be there with Ukraine until the end, we would support them to the end. We're so horrible as a country of supporting through and following through on our commitments.
Well, yeah, it's like Sagar pointed out with the occupation of Gaza, that's pretty much what we try to do. That's nation building. I mean, now you have to if I think it's bad that they can turn off Gaza's water, now you have to install a government, or at least a civil municipality, that will deal with infrastructure, schooling, water, housing, all that. And now you have, just like us in World War II, you bombed out things. Well, now we've bombed it. We have to rebuild it. So the taxpayers in America, since we're giving aid to them, we are helped to rebuild Gaza, So it's this whole thing of BB.
And we've got a massive amount of our military sitting out in the ocean with, I think, 2 carrier groups and a lot of people to keep things from boiling over. Basically, we've just got them there to be like, hey, don't do it. Don't do it.
And there has been some shots fired at the carrier groups, and I think
there's been airstrikes, and
I think no, I don't know if some servicemen died, but I know the first death was by a contractor that was just a U.S. contractor that it is a tense area they were in, I think Iraq, but no fighting going on, and I think they were doing something, and obviously the stuff started to pop off with explosions, and it scared them, and they had a heart attack or something. Like it, that was like the first.
There's been dozens of injuries, lots of like rocket attacks and bombings, and some cruise missiles have been intercepted, and lots of stuff going on. The United States has made airstrikes at places all throughout the Middle East to try to stop or prevent that. And a perfect example of American fighting, right? Like, what are we doing? We're doing precision strikes on specific military things that we have identified.
It sounds like they're just
weaken
going
or
after,
eliminate the ability to fight.
It sounds like what we're doing is just going after their drones, or like if they fire a rocket at us, we just knock it out of the sky or whatever, stuff like that. Because
But we're attacking weapons depots, production facilities.
oh, have we?
camps.
I heard that's on the table, but I don't know if we have yet. I don't think as of now that we have, because I think
these aren't Israeli things. These are other Middle Eastern.
No, but what I'm saying is I think that
things.
we know that like Iran and those other countries will view it as like a declaration of war if we hit one of their fuel depots. So our thing is like, okay, we're just neutral in the thing that we're just knocking stuff out of the sky at this point. We don't want to provoke anybody, but we don't want anybody to get hit with any kind of cruise missiles or anything like that. So
I'm going to look it up.
yeah, look it up right now. We have the internet.
U.S. launches second round of airstrikes on Iran-backed groups it says attacked American troops.
Oh, okay, so they have hit some.
U.S. launches airstrikes on weapons warehouses in Syria.
There you go.
This is 3 days ago.
Oh, I hadn't heard that part. I heard that like we were knocking missiles out of the sky. That's the last I heard. It's a lot to keep in your head, you know. That's part of this episode.
Well, yeah, there's been a lot of stuff going on, and the situation is tense, right? And so, right, like we're tying up our resources in those areas, just our own resources in those areas to try to basically be there as like the big bully in the back, right? While the kids fight. Like you two fight. The rest of you aren't going to join in.
The most benevolent reading of it is we're refs. Like we're literally sitting there batting missiles out of the sky, going no. But yeah, I mean,
yeah, and growing resentment, right? Because what are we doing? We're standing there on the other end of it, defending Israel, standing behind Israel, saying. And in reality, right, like if the United States wasn't backing Israel, I wouldn't be surprised if other countries were bold and joined in and backed Hamas.
Yeah.
But Hamas is probably desperately begging them to, like, come help us.
It sounds like they definitely want Hezbollah to join. They're like, come on. And I mean, I don't know this. I don't know the political situation in Iran. Sorry. I don't know if Iran can do that, can rein in Hezbollah, or if they are a terrorist organization unto themselves, which will just go, we're doing it anyway. So I don't know how that's going to work or how. Whatever. Again, we are just two people that are thousands.
It's a boiling pot.
Yeah, we're and we're just trying to read through.
And having an answer to this, right? This just isn't something that any of us armchair critics are going to have an answer to.
Yeah.
Ilan Pappy and Sam Cedar, and they were talking about it. Talked about
Emma Vigeland was there
too.
She was there too.
Who?
Sorry. She's like the co-host with Sam Cedar. Her name's Emma Vigeland. She was there too.
Okay, I didn't know her name. It didn't show up on the screen, so I wasn't discussing her. But yeah, she was there. But Ilan specifically brought up like it needs to be a single state joined population to solve the problem.
Oh yeah, I was going to bring that up. I was actually going to bring that up.
And I don't think that can happen.
I mean, it's.
I think the animosity and the hatred and the anger is so high. But I would much rather have people on the street throwing punches.
Yeah.
Than
the occasional bar fight or something.
Bombs and yeah, right, exactly. Over bombings and just indiscriminate warfare trying to, and I don't want to call it indiscriminate, right? I don't believe Israel is just bombing refugee camps blindly. They're not just out there like, hey, there's refugees here, let's just go eradicate the Palestinians, which I think a lot of people are accusing them.
I am not accusing them of that. What I'm accusing them is, again, what is a proportionate response? There's one Hamas commander, which I didn't look it up before we recorded. They could neither confirm nor deny that he was there, and they bombed the same refugee camp 3 times. So my question is, in my mind, that means that you obviously view Palestinian life less than you view Israeli life. Like you have said, they're looking at a group of people, like you said, they have to not fight like rats. And that is also going to breed resentment.
Well, that was Ben Shapiro's words, right? Like they need to come out of the tunnels and stop fighting like rats is how he described it, right? You're dehumanizing the enemy. Contact.
Which
is common in war. We do it all the time, right? World War II, our posters were "Kill the Huns."
Yeah, and
referring to the Germans.
Yeah, and then the Germans, they had stuff about us too.
Yeah.
Everybody did. Japanese. We called the
It's
Japanese.
what you do in war.
Yeah.
You dehumanize the enemy so that it's easier to do the atrocious thing,
Yeah.
right?
It makes you feel less bad about doing the terrible thing if you're like, well, they're gnats or flies or whatever, rats.
Right.
I'll say this.
Exactly.
I don't think, obviously Elon Poppy and a lot of people have said a one state solution is like the ultimate pie in the sky goal to turn back the clock in a way to a government like before 1948 when Israel is a state possibly, but then other people have rights to go into that state. Palestinians can freely move through the city. Right now you have to have certain passes to get in if you're a Palestinian to get into parts of like Tel Aviv, I guess, and stuff like that. And that's the thing where a lot of people are having a problem with. If you keep doing that to a group of people, then again, they will remember that and it will foster hatred and stuff like that of like, why can't I just, I'm not Hamas. I just want to go. That cafe looks nice over there. I want to go get some tea or something, but I can't because I'm Palestinian and I don't have the right ID color badge or whatever it is. So
Right.
it's
Which
like,
ironically is what happened to the people in World War II before the war started.
yeah. Yeah.
The difference being is that the Jewish people in Germany weren't, bombing cafes and didn't jump across the border and kill thousands of people and take German hostages. The Germans separated them and slowly but surely, and then eventually systematically and openly killed them.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll say this. I mean, to wrap up, we're getting at the 1 hour mark, but like the whole idea of this has actually made me want to read. I mean, everybody brings up many people bring up 1948 and stuff like that, and kind of like what's happened. I kind of want to read before, like this thing, like Elon Poppy brings up. What was the city-state of Palestine like before? There was a Jewish population there. There was an Arab population. There was Christians there, and they were all. I mean, I've years ago there was that documentary about the Crusades that PBS paid for, and yes, it was a documentary, but it had one of the guys, I want to say Eric Pope, one of the cast of Monty Python was narrating it. It was very funny, but he brought up the thing that even in this area during the Crusades and during different points in the Crusades, that it was fairly peaceful. Everybody had. I remember one of the facts there, which I didn't. It's not verbatim, but I remember there was literally like a schedule for certain holy relics and sites. So it was like, oh, this is a Jewish holy day. Obviously, Jewish people can go to this site on that day. The following Wednesday is a Muslim holy day. We have to go to the site. It's near the same site or whatever. And they said it wasn't 100% peaceful all the time, but it wasn't near what it is today, where it was like we can work this out, right? Like we go to markets and stuff, we work together, and again, that is like the most pie in the sky, whatever. But I think. Because right now, I think there is already a two-state thing going on, like with the apartheid thing of IDs. And I think you need this thing like, hey, I think really apartheid, what I remember about apartheid is I studied a little bit in college, and we had to read the book on reconciliation, which is the idea that we're going to have a big public hearing and everybody's going to air their grievances. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle they're on, what genocide was done, what apartheid was done. Everybody's going to start talking about their crimes. We're not prosecuting anybody, but everybody's going to give, a true account of what happened, and we have to move on. That's what reconciliation is. And so I think for this area, there has to be a reconciliation of they have to have Hamas people come up and go, I was there on October 7th. I killed these people. They were civilians. I feel bad. And then, IDF forces have given interviews where like, yeah, I was in the IDF in the 70s and we went into this village and just killed everybody. Like there has to be that atonement to go, we've all made mistakes, but we have to move forward somehow. And that everybody keeps bringing up the apartheid state, but that's the one thing I remember in college where our professor said, listen, I'll give you the quick history of apartheid, which is terrible. But what's really important about apartheid is this reconciliation council that came out of the end of it. And it was very illuminating for criminals to get on the stand and say, I killed innocent people. But here's what I did. I mean, there's footage of it still online where people are just crying because it's like, that was my family. But thank you for telling me what happened. That kind of public thing is, I don't know. Anyway, it's going to continue.
It's something that we are capable of. I don't have a high level of hope it will happen.
Yeah.
But right? Like that's how it used to work, right? Like they had the holy places. Everyone just sort of agreed, like the only way we're going to make this peacefully work is that everyone agrees that we share it.
Yeah, Sunday is a Christian day. They get the church, whatever, the church on the mount or, whatever, all those sites. Like we just divide it up. Ramadan happens in this month. You stay out of the mosque or, whatever. Like that's their month, man, or whatever it was.
And at this point in time, the reason I'm not hopeful that it will happen, but maybe it could, right? The reason I'm not hopeful is that the hatred levels are so high and the distrust is so high, right? Israelis are so used to, Jewish people as a whole globally are so used to being just hated because they are Jewish, that their willingness to trust someone that's like, you know what, I'm not going to tell you right now globally is pretty low. And the Palestinian people, like, I don't see them in their current state having a lot of willingness to trust Israel, saying, you know what, we're not going to do it. Unless someone bigger and meaner comes in to keep the peace,
Well,
right? Like, and it can't be us.
No, a lot of people have brought up, like, no matter what, again, to pick on Ben Shapiro, when he laughs at international organizations, said they're illegitimate, this, like, the UN sucks, he said stuff like that before. It's like, well, then what's the answer?
They're pretty weak.
Well, yeah, but I mean, what's the answer? Then there's going to have to be some international agreement to this is a problem of the world. You know, there's so many countries around there that are impacted by this, and us for aid and things like that. How do we all get to the table and decide this is what we need to do? So I hate to rain on Ben Shapiro's parade. There has to be some kind of international organization to be put in charge of this. And I hate to say it. I mean, I know people hate the UN and they're weak, but we agreed to all this stuff a long time ago. Even if we bankroll them and all that, it's like, we've agreed to be a part of it. Maybe we should use it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, the UN has proven to be pretty ineffectual in the past, right? Sending in peacekeepers and trying to do peacekeeper operations. But to some degree, it has worked. And maybe it's something, again, that we do, right? There's got to be an agreement. All the countries that are a part of the UN would contribute and back that in some capacity. The UN can be pretty ineffectual in a lot of stuff, but it's the best tool that we have, right? The reason I say it can't be us is because we aren't trusted in the region.
Oh, yeah.
Whether or not we went in with the best intentions in mind, the region won't trust us.
Right.
And anything that we do is going to be, we're part of the problem and part of the enemy.
Yeah.
The current state of the world, though, everyone's becoming more populist. Globally, the world is moving away from globalization and into more nationalism and isolation. And so getting people to commit to, well, that's someone else's problem.
Yeah.
And not recognizing that, like, no, this isn't someone else's problem. This is a global problem. We live in a global planet.
That's the one thing I'd criticize, like Sagar and even Vivek, who's running for president. You know, he's like, if it doesn't concern us, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, that's such an old, like, listen, I don't want to be involved in wars either. And to be honest, like, to be very bold, like, if I was president, armchair quarterback, I would say, listen, Israel, this has gone on for X amount of days. You haven't been able to prove, like, hopefully we're sharing intelligence. And you just say, listen, you haven't been able
sure we are.
You haven't been able to prove that this is, like, affecting Hamas in a reasonable way, and you're doing collective punishment by turning off water and all that. So our aid is conditional. We will give you rockets for the Iron Dome, and we will fund X amount of dollars, but we were going to cut off funding if you continue to turn off the water. The basic thing I want you to do, like, if I was, I'd say, BB, the basic thing I need you to do as a government is you need to turn the water and the power on for Gaza, because to me, that's a basic right. Now, is Hamas stealing that? We've talked about that. Yes, they probably are. But I think it would say a lot to people that look at us poorly politically. It would say, yes, here's an olive branch. But two, to give people basic services is just so, it's great, right? It's like, yeah, now we have water and power and we have a way to shape our destiny in a way. You know, Peter Zeihan, who you and I like a lot, said, you know, Hamas's whole thing right now is to be who's going to run the prison, because Gaza is basically an open air prison. All that is true, but the thing is like, imagine if those people had water and power and could start to make their own way and have some actualization for their own destiny. That would go a long way, I think, to peace in the Middle East. And all that is you need water and power and, you know, like schools.
I disagree with you. I don't think that's enough. I mean, honestly,
that's
it
like
needs to be more than that.
That's like step one. For me, like, that's like step one of, like, now you have this, you know, like...
If you want to win hearts and minds, right? Like, if you want to actually get in there and help them recognize that the Israeli people, the Jewish Israeli people. I'm not going to say Jewish because it's Israel as a whole,
Yeah.
right? And Israel as a whole is a mix of all kinds of different people, right? The Israeli people are human, and the Palestinian people are human. And if you want to do that, you have to get in there and provide direct contact and aid, and you've got to do it in a way where it weakens the messaging, it weakens the power, it weakens the propaganda of Hamas. You've got to go in and basically neuter Hamas in the hearts and minds of the people, not militarily. Weakening them militarily, right? Like I think is a great idea. If you can take out 80% of their combatants and eliminate the weapons so that they're not as bold.
Like a lot of people have talked, their commanders aren't even in Gaza. They're like in Qatar and all these other places. So it's like, why not arrest them if they're in charge of everything? You know, hold them responsible for, you know, their military.
And if you can, you should.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it's
but
like
the point being, right? Like you take out as much as you possibly can, but then you've got to go back in and make right some of your promises, right? Like the United States, the comparison to Native Americans in the United States is kind of a good comparison in a lot of ways, but not necessarily in others, right? Like we as a nation have never made it right with the Native Americans.
This isn't even about reparations, though, too. You know, a lot of people talk about. I'm sorry, I'm going to take you on a walk. So, I don't even think it's like reparations, like paying. It's crap. I just forgot the word. It's just a man. It's another R word. It's basically, it's not a reconciliation. It's
remuneration.
Yeah, it's basically like saying, how are we going? What are we going to do to make this? Like, what is the most basic thing we've done to Native Americans to like basically apologize? Is it nowadays when we say, "Hey, we're really sorry for the whole reservation thing," and you know, like, what do you?
I mean, it's about the best that we've done, right? Like here in the United States, sticking with that conversation, right? Like we can't give them back their land; it's occupied, right? Like we're not. To give Native American tribes back their land, we've then got to take the land from other people that live in those homes who were not a part of it, who had nothing to do with it, who were simply born and raised and lived, right? So you can't punish one person for the crimes of someone they weren't related to, they had nothing to do with 150, 200 years ago. Yeah. But on the same note, like, how do you go back to those people and be like, yeah, what we did was pretty screwed up. Like, it was really screwed up as a nation, and we want to recognize that and, like, do what we can to make it better. But if we look at tribes and we look at reservations and what's happened with them, right? Like there's generations and generations and generations of damage because of what was done in that. And if you analyze that in regards to what's happening in Israel and Gaza and the West Bank, all of it together collectively, right? Like what lessons do we learn from that so that we can not do that again? And you know, the answer isn't chasing the Palestinian people out.
Yeah,
I mean, you could. Yeah. Maybe we globally like, we're just going to take this land from this country and give it to these people because that worked really well last time.
Yeah, it didn't. I mean, we should. Well, that's the thing too. Like the international community, like I said earlier, really thinks that Israel shouldn't be doing the whole settler thing in the West Bank, and that it is clearly, even people that stand with Israel, when you bring up the West Bank, they're like, oh yeah, we shouldn't be doing that. It's like, so then you agree that it's wrong and shouldn't happen, you know? Like, it's...
But what do we do to stop it? Right, we could pull aid, we could stop backing. The United States is easily the biggest backer of it. I think the big concern for politicians in the United States with pulling aid and not backing Israel for that kind of stuff is Israel is surrounded by countries that hate them on a scale that we don't experience, right? Like Americans are hated in a large part of the world, but we're not surrounded, and we're easily the bigger bully.
I don't know. Has anybody checked Canada lately? I don't know if Canada.
No, I don't know. I don't even necessarily want to say bigger bully, but like we're the bigger combatant when it comes into the people that hate the United States for the most part, right? Right. Israel is itty bitty, and they are completely surrounded with people that hate them for their existence because of what they are.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, we're running a little long,
which is why it was so significant that Saudi Arabia was going to recognize Israel as a country. It was
Yeah,
so important for that region.
I wonder. I
Um,
wonder too if like some of this after all this terribleness is over, however it ends, hopefully without more and more nations getting dragged into it. But if there's some kind of, if there's some kind of, if there's some kind of penalty or something for Benjamin Netanyahu and his cabinet, because there is discontent, like we talked about in Israel, about hey, these people are too far right wing. There seems to be a lot of young people that are like, this is no good. You know what I mean? So like maybe they will elect a new prime minister. You know that after,
it's probably going to happen. Netanyahu's own base is going to be after him.
yeah,
Failed on his promises,
yeah,
and all of the other controversies around the Supreme Court, around corruption,
yeah,
everything else with Netanyahu, right? Like he won't survive this politically.
right.
If he has any ramifications or punishments out of it, I don't know, right? Like he did not attack Israel and kill all these innocent Israeli people and citizens himself, but as a leader, he failed, and so it's like I do not see him surviving this politically. He's also old, right? Like he's just
Would be
not
70
going to live for a whole lot longer.
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing
So
we have here where it's like, do you want an 80-year-old or a 77-year-old to run the country for, because his thing being a prime minister, I mean, I remember it's been years. I don't know how long he's been prime minister, but when I was younger, I remember.
well, he wasn't for a while and then got elected back in too.
Right.
They don't have term limits.
Yeah.
So like he was for a while and then someone else won and then he ran again and then won again.
That's another thing of what I've learned through all this is I know what their cabinet is called over there, their governing body, which I never thought I'd learn the name for the Israeli governing body, but I had to learn that where I was like, oh, the Knesset, great. Okay, I don't know what that is.
There is no easy answer. Probably the right thing to do is the most difficult thing to do, because it entails owning that more people are going to die, and we've got to be okay with that. We've got to be willing to not punch back. We're not going in defenseless. We're not going to defend ourselves.
That's the thing, man.
But we're also
it's I totally understand from their perspective. Again, like we said at the top, why the day after they're like bomb them. You know, like I get it, but now that it's been a month out, it's like, guys, we've done that before. It didn't really work, and like you need to. You can't tell me they don't have a binder somewhere, a 3-ring binder notebook with like some notes on it of like, if they do this, then we will do this. Like you can't tell me.
I mean, maybe the answer to this is right. Like, hey, look, guys. Like, yep, we're gonna stop bombing. We're gonna turn the water on. We're gonna turn electricity on. We're gonna bring your wounded into our hospitals. We're gonna set up military hospitals. We're gonna bring in foreign aid. We're gonna do all of that. We're gonna bring in food. We're gonna bring in shelter. We're gonna give you the space to do this on your own. We're not gonna tell you to do it our way, but we're gonna provide what you need to help. But as a condition, you need to show us where the entries are to these tunnels so that we can close them.
You know, I have a feeling they know where those are. But yeah, I know what you're saying.
I mean, the people do, right? The problem is people aren't going to want to turn that over because they don't trust the other side.
Well, I think it's interesting.
Maybe the condition isn't even, hey, we're going to close those tunnels. We're just going to sit here with guns and wait for them to come out.
Well, I would
and then take them to jail.
I would actually want to know, see if that report was confirmed about the hostage swap, if that was true, and why Israel said no. Because that's the original reporting. I want to know if that's true and why Israel said no. Did they think something nefarious was going to happen? Because a lot of people that,
I wouldn't trust them.
Expatriates and obviously Israeli citizens that have been taken captive, a lot of them are like, hey, we need to bring our people home. So whatever you have to do, Israel, to bring them home, do it. So I'll actually look after this and see how that's going. So, Avin, it's been great again to talk to you. I don't think we destroyed each other. I don't think that's probably what.
No one was destroyed in this podcast.
There was no caps.
No one was owned.
No, we didn't own each other. We didn't destroy. We didn't, man, there's other buzzwords I can't think of right now. But yeah, maybe that's why we're not getting as many views as I'd like, is because maybe we need to make some fake yelling clips of like some shorts where we just yell at each other. I make it a YouTube short, and then at the end I say, is that enough, do you think, to get a short out of how we destroy each other? And then maybe we need to do like, not a political thing, but like...
pseudo agreement, civil conversation doesn't really get a lot of...
Maybe we could do a fake debate about like Coke and Diet Coke or Red Bull versus something, and like yell about that and what's the best fry, and then you could say it's not a crinkle fry.
Sugar free versus sugar full.
Yeah, something like that. So, is there anything you want to plug before we leave, Avin? I know you got stuff you're working on.
I mean, like I do on every one of these, plug Your Agent Guide, my real estate business where I connect people to professional real estate agents I know that are a good match for you and your needs and what you're looking for.
I mean,
finding a real estate agent can be hard.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an old man. I still use Facebook, and I see your updates on Facebook about market trends and such. So,
yeah, the idea is to just empower people with information and knowledge so they can make the right decisions. And then, like I said, like my whole purpose for Your Agent Guide is to help people find the good, talented, professional real estate agents that match their needs in their area. I do help people with real estate transactions if they ask me to, but I do that pretty limited, just basically friends and family. I have no intention of being a full-time real estate agent.
It's not the.
I do enjoy it.
It's like the pirate life. It's not for you. It's not your.
My purpose is to help, and not to go out and get rich. And I don't want to say that's the purpose of a lot of real estate agents, but that's the perception. And so,
well, you want to at least make a living, right? You want to make a living.
I think I am more. I think I can be more trustworthy as a guided source to help people connect to the right real estate agents. If I'm not saying I'm the right one for you.
Yeah.
Because if I say that, then I think that diminishes and erodes the trust that people can have in me. Whereas if I say my intention is to help you find someone else, I think it's a more trustworthy view position, and I want people to be able to trust that they're working with someone who has their best interest in mind.
Yeah.
That's the purpose of Your Agent Guide. Long plug. I'm not asking you to use me as your agent. I'm telling you that if you need help finding one, I can help you do that with zero pressure to work with me. Directly.
You got some YouTube videos too. They're a little old, but they're still relevant.
A lot of it is still relevant. It's Your Agent Guide YouTube channel. Yeah. Also,
go ahead.
I do want to plug the Gaming with Grief podcast.
There we go. I was going to do it.
It's hosted by a good friend of mine. His name's Joseph Carlson. Happens to be the other half of this podcast. If you're a gamer, you enjoy that kind of stuff, Joe does a great job of kind of analyzing and reviewing games from the perspective of processing grief.
Mm-hmm. Also, we talk about layoffs and stuff in the gaming industry. Avin, we've talked a lot about Activision and Blizzard. Let me tell you something. It has been announced that Bobby Kotick's time is almost done at Activision Blizzard. So I think when he is gone officially on January 1st, maybe we'll do an episode after the first year and we'll pop champagne. And maybe I'll buy another Blizzard game finally after 3 or 4 years not wanting to support that guy and see his stock options go up when he gives interviews and says, man, I don't really know about these unions. Am I right? And you're like, what? But your mom was a teacher. Okay, anyway. Everybody have a good month. I don't
Wrong podcast, Joe.
Yeah, I know. I'll go on a big thing. Long plug, as Avin said. But yeah, so check out Gaming with Grief. We're here every month. If you want to write to us at gwgpodfellows@gmail.com. Let us know what episode you had feedback about and what you want to talk to us about. We'll accept ones like your episode sucks, because at least that's feedback.
Honestly, on this particular episode, tell us where we're wrong, right?
Yeah.
There's so many viewpoints and opinions and thoughts. Like, what did we miss?
Give us a reading list, because every video and stuff I clicked on, all the ones I shared with you, everybody said, well, let me tell you the other side of the story. And so there's always that out there. I think, everybody makes fun of Last Week Tonight and all these comedic podcasts that talk about history and how dumb they are. But the ones I respect actually go, here's the reading list we used to research this episode. Why don't you read some of these books and let us know how we screwed up? So go in the comments, or again, write to us and let us know how we screwed up. I think that's it for this month. We don't really know what we're going to talk about next month yet. We're still deciding on what to do.
I think we're going to delve into the idea of libertarianism.
Oh, sweet.
Specifically the Libertarian Party.
Sweet.
We were going to double record this, but we did not this weekend.
There was a massive communication thing last night, somewhat late. Like, what? Yeah, there was some of that. So, but we got an episode. We did the thing. So everybody have a good month, and we will talk to everybody next month.